Today you've been looking at some cross sections of your piece of celery that you placed in the colored water last week, and the cross sections are very thin so we can see through them, the light can shine through them, and you see these dark spots that are called the xylem of the celery. We're going to use two words today talking about xylem, and it's XYLEM, and the other word is phloem, PHLOEM. So when we magnify the celery cross-section, we can start to see the individual cells. And you're able to see these little bundles up closer. And before I mention two things, the xylem and the phloem. The xylem, as you're going to see, are the larger little cells that have a larger opening, and they're relatively plain in the middle. And then you're going to see some smaller ones around it that are called the phloem. The phloem actually carry the food, which is the sugars that the plants create during photosynthesis. The xylem are one-way tubes that pump from the roots to the end of the leaves, and they carry water from the ground all the way out to the leaves. That's very important so that the plant doesn't wilt and so that it actually can go through photosynthesis, because water is essential for the plant to be able to create the sugars. They're one way, they go from the roots up. There are little valves that section them off and keep it flowing in one direction so that they can't go backwards. Kind of like if you had your water hose turned on and you can turn your little sprayer on and off, and the water can't go back into the hose, but it can only come out of the hose. So the water in the xylem can only flow in one direction. Now the phloem, that it moves in both directions because it's important for the nutrients to get to the leaves where photosynthesis takes place. But then once the sugars are made during photosynthesis, it's got to carry that sugar back to all parts of the plant, or the plant would not have nutrients and it would end up dying. So from the roots, nutrients like minerals of potassium, fertilizers and things that is needed by the plants move upward, and then after the photosynthesis takes place in the leaves and sugar has been created, glucose has been created, it needs to be carried back to all parts of the plant so that it can stay alive. So now in this slide I want to show you two different types of plants. We have done the cross-section of the celery. We'll come back and try to figure out which one of these two types that celery is after I explain the two types. The one on the left is called a monocot. M-O-N-O-C-O-T. Monocot, as you see, has these bundles that are just randomly placed all around in the stem. This is a cross-section of a stem, and when you cut it across, you can see these denser bundles of xylem and phloem that we talked about in the previous slide that is going all around. It's random. The one on the right is called a dicot plant, D-I-C-O-T. And if you look, they ring the plant. They're in a circle around the edges of a plant. So if we had a tree and you took and cut, you sawed kind of all the way around the tree, we call that girdling a tree, and you saw just a little bit all the way around, you're going to actually cut all of these bundles. So if that happened, if it was girdled, if the tree was girdled, what do you think is going to happen to that tree? Okay, so your celery, if we looked at the cross-section of it, it may have been different colors, but you probably saw these bundles around the sides in sort of an orderly fashion, kind of like in a definite ring along the outer edges. Then within those rings, you see that you have these tiny little clusters. That's where the food is moving up and down the stem as it's produced in the leaves. The sugar is produced in the leaves. It has to move up and down the stem so that it's carried throughout the plant and keeps it alive. What are those called? Do you remember the ones that carry food? Food begins with the F sound, and phloem, Phloem. That's the way I remember it, was food and phloem. They both have the F sound. Then we have these larger cells. Some of them are kind of large right in here that are toward the center of the plant stem, and those are called xylem. Do you remember what xylem carry? What's unique about xylem? So now I've mentioned two other words in the last slide, monocots and dicots, or we can say eudicots, but dicots are what we typically say. So the dicots, we said, have a circular kind of ring of the xylem and phloem bundles, those little vascular bundles that are carrying food and water up and down the plant. And then in the monocots, we have the vascular bundles that are moved, that are all scattered throughout the stem. So monocots have this, one thing in particular is that they have a thing called a cotyledon, and that's how we get the word monocot. Mono means what? And cot stands for cotyledon. If we said di, the prefix di, di, in dicots, what does that tell you? Okay, and so the monocots have one cotyledon, and the dicots have two cotyledons. That means the parts of the seeds. Then another feature is that whenever they start to sprout, we're going to find that the monocot has only one little leaf that comes out of the ground, while a dicot is going to have two little leaves that pop up out of the ground. So that's kind of a way to find out real quickly. Then if we look at their leaves, monocots always have veins that are like in straight lines like this, like grasses and corn and wheat and things. Whereas the other things that are dicots, they're going to have the veining that are going to be scattered and spread out from a central location. So monocot and dicot, and we'll be doing an experiment or a dissection with a couple of these, and we'll see the difference in those two this week. Okay.